Hello my friends, welcome back. Now I thought we'd do this little bonus part because we've had quite a few people telling us that they're having trouble with their sleep at the moment, and in particular feeling quite stressed out and asking for any helpful tips in this regard. So we thought we'd share the love and give you a quick two-part video sequence on what we can do for ourselves at the moment to help us get to sleep. I've been there even just last week. I would try to get to sleep, and the second my head hit the pillow, my thoughts decided to have a little party in my mind, and dang it, we've all been there at some stage. Let's see what we can do to help make things a little easier for all of us. Part one is just about getting around why we're having trouble with our sleep at the moment and getting a better understanding and a little compassion for ourselves at this time. Part two of this sequence really dives right into what we can actually do to help get ourselves to sleep. So firstly, in helping people overcome their sleep troubles, I often find it is helpful to understand the evolutionary cause of why we struggle with sleep. Insomnia is not unique to modern day humans, as we might think, and has been around for millennia. For example, if you're a hunter-gatherer tribe in the African bush sleeping around a fire and you hear a lion creep up nearby, the stress of that external threat would ensure you stay hyper alert and super awake to fend for yourself and not just be kind of sleeping your way through it. This was useful back then for these potentially dodgy situations, and also likely didn't occur on a chronic basis. However, in this modern world today, we sleep in relatively safe places, in our protected bedrooms, and this kind of physical threat isn't common. Our perception of perceived threats has changed. Now it would be work stress, or interpersonal conflict, or in this case, stress with regards to the current crisis and its effect on our immediate lives. And so the insomnia we get due to this kind of anxiety of this kind of non-physical threat is suddenly not so useful. It doesn't serve us to stay awake all night, to leave us to our ruminating thoughts and increasing stress levels. It's frustrating, and therefore from a doctor perspective, this emphasizes the need to reduce the sources of stress and anxiety and improve our coping strategies for these perceived threats that appear unresolvable. And to be honest, we might not be able to think ourselves into better sleep. That certainly hasn't worked for me. But there are ways and means that we can trick our bodies and minds into inducing sleep. So firstly, if you are having trouble with falling asleep, now more than ever, this is absolutely expected during this time. Even in the best of times when things are stable and dandy, many people have issues with insomnia. And I think now more than ever, we'll be seeing more and more people having trouble with this. Let me first explain why this might be. What's happening at the moment is pretty darn stressful. In fact, some of you may recognize how you feel, that you feel stressed out and tense. And for some of us, it may be very subconscious. We don't even realize that there are underlying stresses, and we manage to convince ourselves we're fine to power on through. But things can sometimes build up without us really acknowledging what's going on in here, if you know what I mean. Let me explain. Believe it or not, actually just believe it, that we're under a fair amount of stress during our day. Our routines have been thrown off, stressor number one. We're being bombarded with negative news and overwhelmed with all the scary stuff out there, stressor number two. We're all under more tension at home with new demands from our families and schedules, like having adequate food supplies, stressor number three. We're likely feeling isolated and disconnected from our communities and friends, stressor number four. And now we're having to navigate our own emotional, mental landscape through this time, which is bloody tough, stressor number five. And then of course on top of that, we have the physical or financial stresses, children at home, or a myriad of other life stuff adding to our bucket. The thing is, how we react to this stress isn't the same on a day-to-day basis. We may be quite resilient on a usual day, but we don't have endless capacity for resilience. In fact, we can view our resilience as like a little reserve bank, or I like to think of it like a glass full of water, let's say. And each time we have to deal with stress, we use up some of our mental resilience to adequately cope and appropriately react to that piece of stress, rationally, logically, and keep our emotional response in check, right? So a little bit of water gets poured out of the cup. Now say something major happens. You lose your job or a loved one falls ill. That's pretty traumatic, and it's like the whole glass has been tipped over right there and then. We don't have space to deal with any more stress. That's it. That would be like a macro stressor. But in a much more subtler and more subconscious way, what we don't realize is that our day is actually filled with these micro stressors too. What do I mean by that? Well, these are little events that add up to use up our mental resilience cup. So like we wake up, we check our phones and we get bombarded with negative stimuli. We pour some water out of the cup. Then we have an argument, say with a loved one over the phone or at home, we pour a little more water out. Then you can't get the groceries you needed for the week. Then we feel stressed about having touched something somewhere and wondered if it was contaminated. Did we wash our hands enough today? Just keeping up with the current rules and regulations takes mental effort, not to mention the uncertainty of how long things will go on for or whether things will escalate further. Then of course our negative self-talk starts to kick in, right? Telling yourself that you're not being productive enough, you're not being healthy enough, or exercising enough, or using your time more effectively. Then you can't get a good night's sleep because your thoughts are going round and round in your head. And each one of these seemingly small events acts as a micro stressor that builds up in the day, starts using up your resilience, your reserve bank, until we feel like our cup is empty, with all these little micro stresses building up even subconsciously. At the moment, with what's going on with the crisis, there's a lot of stress and extra things we have to manage and cope with, not just what's out there, but in here, in our heads, in our hearts, and even in our bodies, how we feel and react physically. So our cups are likely getting emptied a little quicker than usual. And we're left feeling more frazzled and burnt out, despite feeling like we're just kind of sitting around at home all day. It's emotionally exhausting and really very stressful. So that's the first thing I wanted to say about stress and this build-up of micro and macro stresses that is likely wearing you down. In fact, all of us down to some degree. So what we need to realize is that we need to each day give ourselves something that fills up our own cup. Do something for ourselves and nobody else that helps build our resilience. And we have to do this every day to keep the cup full. That means time out for your mind to relax, time to do something fun, time to move, to just breathe and shake off some of that tension, that pressure. Fill up your cup with what feels good for you. Essentially, this is self-care and you time. We often tend to neglect self-care when we're just sitting at home. But it's at this stage, during these kinds of crises, that we need to be intentionally and consciously giving ourselves this time. We may not notice these micro stresses and things affecting us. We might be able to keep ourselves really busy, but it is likely affecting you. And sometimes if we don't listen and take these breaks, we end up feeling quite wound up, or like we're experiencing an emotional roller coaster from feeling fine to really sad, then frustrated, then anxious, then restless, and all the emotions in between. These ups and downs are to be expected, even if you feel a bit guilty about how you're reacting. Also really common, like, hey, well, there's nothing wrong with my situation and I have nothing to be so emotional about. Why am I reacting like this today? Why can't I hold it together? I'm fine. This is where we need to stop, breathe. You absolutely do have a reason to feel the way you do. We all do. So give yourself a little self-compassion for however you're feeling, as you would perhaps a dear friend or a family member. Really, take it easy on yourself. And your friends and family for that matter too. We're all a little edgy and probably not feeling quite like ourselves. And know that each day is different. Some days you're stronger, you've got this, more resilient, like a bigger sized cup. It's Friday and it's an extra large takeaway cup because, you've got this. And other days we feel like we have a teeny tiny shot glass. We don't wake up feeling strong or resilient, and that's completely okay to feel. Right, now let's talk about stress and sleep. So when we're stressed, our bodies produce something called cortisol, which is a hormone released by the adrenal glands to have a number of effects. It makes us feel more alert and wired and cause physical symptoms too, quite complex. But importantly, it actually suppresses a hormone called melatonin, which is our sleep-inducing molecule that gets released to allow us to fall asleep at night. Therefore, high stress levels would prevent us from falling asleep. Cortisol and melatonin are forever in this careful balance, which is why we often can't get to sleep around stressful times in our lives, whether it's work or financial or relationship stress. It often keeps us awake. But also, it reiterates the importance of managing our stress during the day to help us with our sleep at night. So in the next lecture, my friends, we're going to delve into what we can do to reduce stress and anxiety, but importantly, to set our minds and bodies up in a way that is sleep promoting rather than sleep preventing. And everything I talk about is, of course, backed by the latest research, so stay tuned, my friend. I think this might just help. Lots of love. I'll see you soon.